This is a true story of Kendra, a woman who chose to tell her story not with anger, but with courage and vulnerability. Her voice, honest and unfiltered, cut through the internet like a knife. She wasn't looking for fame or drama. She was looking to be heard, to be understood. She wanted to shine a light on something dark, something that too many people are afraid to name: manipulation inside the walls of therapy. This isn't the story of a woman who had a crush on her doctor. It's about how a man, her psychiatrist, trained to help her, took that trust and slowly turned it into something unsafe. This is about bloodlines, emotional grooming, and a system that let it all happen. Let's go back to where it all began. Kendra had been off her ADHD medication for quite some time. Back in college, she had been taking it regularly, but over time, the side effects started to wear her down. Instead of feeling more focused and balanced, she felt disconnected and jittery. Eventually, she made the tough decision to stop taking the medication altogether, thinking maybe she could manage on her own. But as the months passed, the challenges of living with unmanaged ADHD slowly crept back into her life. She began to struggle with focus again, with emotional regulation, and even day-to-day routines started to feel overwhelming. It wasn't until she picked up a self-help book on ADHD that things began to shift. The book offered insight into the science behind the condition and reminded her of the benefits she once had while on medication. The stories in the book resonated with her deeply. She began to reflect on how much more stable her life could be with the right kind of support. That is when she decided to look for a psychiatrist. Not just any doctor, she wanted someone who understood adult ADHD, someone who could guide her through the process gently. After a few online searches, she landed on one who looked promising and had good reviews. He was nearby and accepting new patients, so she booked a 90-minute intake session.
I fell in love with my psychiatrist, and he knew, and he kept me until I had the strength to leave after 4 years. Here it is, part 1. So I decided to go back on ADHD meds after many years of being off of them. I was on them in my early 20s to help me get through college, and then I went off of them because they just weren't, the side effects were too much over the benefits. But then in my late 20s, I read this book, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD, and it absolutely changed my life. For my fellow ADHDers, there's so many good things in here. And the biggest thing that I took away was that it's very important for ADHDers to be on meds. So I decided to make an appointment with a psychiatrist. I just Googled psychiatry in the city that I lived in, and I went with the first one that came up, and I got an appointment within a month. And then I booked a 90-minute intake, and I show up to the intake, and this man is my age, and I can't help but notice that he's pretty attractive, this psychiatrist.
When the day finally came, she logged onto the Zoom call and met him. He was around her age, maybe just a little older. She described him as an attractive, well-groomed, and articulate man. He had a calm voice and a confident demeanor. Right away, she felt something stir inside of her. Not infatuation, not yet, but interest. A spark. Still, she reminded herself that this was a doctor, a professional. She needed help, and this wasn't about anything else. So she showed up, fully honest. She told him about her past struggles, how she had used substances in the past, how her childhood was filled with pain and instability, how she was trying to build a life in sobriety. She talked about old wounds and relationship trauma, things she did not tell most people.
In this intake, I kind of clocked that he was attractive in my age, but when I tell you that I've had a lot of couch time in my life, a lot of therapy, I just went right into it. I trusted him enough, of course, why wouldn't I, to tell him about my childhood trauma, my daddy issues, if you will, what I had went through, all of the relationship trauma that I had. I was 6 months sober at this time, but all of the drinking and substance use I used to do, and he just listened and nodded, and That's the thing about psychiatrists, is that they're good at pretending to listen. They can appear connected, but that doesn't mean that they're always connected. So I just felt really seen. And I also told him, I was like, look, I don't want to be on stimulant meds. So he listened to me and he put me on the non-stimulant ADHD med at the lowest dose just to figure out if it was going to work for me.
But here, in this virtual room with this calm and welcoming man, she felt safe, seen. That is what patients are supposed to do, right? Open up, trust, believe that the person in front of them is there to help. And at that moment, she believed it too. She told him she did not want stimulant meds because she had experienced uncomfortable side effects in the past: anxiety, jitteriness, and trouble sleeping. She was trying to maintain her sobriety and did not want anything that might trigger those old feelings or disrupt her emotional stability. He nodded with what seemed like understanding and agreed, putting her on the lowest dose of non-stimulant to see how it worked. It felt reassuring at first. It seemed like he was listening, tailoring the treatment to her needs. Everything appeared to be normal, by the book. But as the weeks passed, Kendra began to sense something she couldn't explain. There was a kind of attentiveness in the way he looked at her, the way he asked questions and responded to her answers. He wasn't clinical. He felt personal, not like a psychiatrist trying to understand a patient, but like someone trying to learn her deeply, intricately, almost as if he was mentally cataloging who she was. It felt less like he was trying to help her heal and more like he was mapping her for his own reasons. He remembered little details she hadn't expected him to, things that most doctors might overlook. He held on to. And instead of using those insights to support her growth or tailor her treatment, it felt like he was using them to build something else, something invisible but heavy. She brushed the thought aside. Maybe she was overthinking it. Maybe he was just being thorough, professional. But deep down, a small voice inside whispered, something isn't right.
I hadn't ever seen a psychiatrist before. When I was on meds in my early 20s, I only got meds from my primary care physician. So I didn't understand how psychiatry works. So because he was figuring out my med dose, I saw him every month, and he just made me feel like I was his friend. He was really, really funny and cracked jokes and told me he was impressed with my running that I would do. And yeah, so of course I loved the attention that I got from him. And it was in my third session with him, because at this point we were all on Zoom, that I asked him, I said, hey, do you mind if I call you by your first name? And he's Pakistani, so I said his first name wrong. And he said, well, it's pronounced this. But yes, of course you can. And he seemed so smug and happy with himself. And I know that that is because that was his first sign that him pretending like we're friends was working. And to be fair to me, I had only ever been to therapy before. I didn't realize that, it's important to call your doctor last name. I mean, I did know that. I did it with all my other doctors, but it just showed that the boundaries were blurring, and he liked that. So from then on, from my third session on, I started calling him his first name. And then he just started turning up the volume on us being friendly. And he would ask me, for the first 6 sessions, he asked me, after the meds, he said, how's your bowels, bladder, and appetite? And I would say they're all normal. And then he would ask me any thoughts of harm. And apparently that's pretty common for psychiatry to ask those questions. And then on our 6th session, when things were really, the chemistry was starting to be there before, I didn't realize it. I was like, oh, this man is just friendly. And he said, I have to ask this because it's a special interest of mine, but is there any thoughts of harm? I was special to him. And I said, no thoughts of harm. And he didn't ever ask me a clinical question again. He stopped asking me about my bladder, bowels, and appetite, and he stopped asking me about thoughts of harm. So to me, I would just show up and he was like a therapy appointment every month.
This was Kendra's first time with a psychiatrist. She had gone to doctors before, sure. Primary care, physicians, therapists, support groups, but never a psychiatrist. She did not know what the typical interaction was supposed to feel like. She had no way of knowing where the boundaries began and where they were supposed to firmly be held. What she did know was that she was seeking help, and She was ready to trust this new experience. From the very beginning, there was a casualness in their conversations, something soft in his tone. He did not wear the stoic mask that most doctors did, and that made him feel approachable, relatable, almost like a friend. Maybe that was what made her feel so comfortable, suggesting, by the third session, that she call him by his first name. It felt innocent in the moment. She thought it would enlighten the atmosphere, make communication easier. He smiled when she asked, more than smiled. It was the kind of expression that looked like validation, like he had been waiting for her to take that step. And in that instant, something shifted. She did not know it then, but that moment marked the beginning of bloodlines that would only grow more dangerous over time. By the sixth session, he told her she was a patient of special interest. It was an odd phrase, one she hadn't heard before. She wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or alarmed. No matter how she interpreted it, one thing was clear. The way he treated her had changed. Subtly at first, but unmistakably. The clinical structure began to erode. He stopped asking the basic mental health check-in questions. He no longer asked if she was feeling down or having suicidal thoughts. The formalities disappeared. Instead, their conversations began more about ideas, about feelings, about him, less about her treatment.
So I was seeing him every month and just gaining more and more respect for him because he would just tell me these little things about his successes and all of the cool things that he was doing in his life. And it made me fall for him, honestly. And he was really good at listening. And I mean, he's a Pisces, right? So of course he's gonna be there and be able to go deep with my feelings, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't extracting from them. Anyway, so I would beg him to let me see him every week. Beg him, because my therapist at the time, he was fine. You know, he wasn't a predator, but he was fine. He just wasn't doing very much for me. And so that therapist retired and I got a new therapist. And this new therapist, who is a 75-year-old woman with a PhD, she was pretty helpful. So I stopped asking my psychiatrist, begging, honestly, to be my therapist and let me see him more, right? Which also should have been a red flag. But then I started focusing on this therapist. However, I would tell the therapist how obsessed I was with my psychiatrist, and she didn't do anything about it. She just was interested. She also loved stories about my dating life, and yeah, she also was getting supply from me in her own way, but that's for another part. So I got a new therapist who actually helped me. She taught me CBT, EFT, all of these different modalities. And so I went back to just being okay with seeing Irfan once a month while he was giving me these little breadcrumbs of making me feel special, telling me about his professional achievements, telling me about how he's getting international recognition. And it worked. I was really impressed.
What she did not realize was that these changes weren't a part of some unique therapeutic style. They were warning signs, but she was walking right past them, unaware that the path she was on would soon twist into something completely unrecognizable. He started dropping personal details, bits of his success, stories from his life, background details that were never necessary for her treatment but always seemed to come at moments when she was emotionally open. He would casually mention his academic achievements, his travels, even small moments that reflect how thoughtful or compassionate he was. And each detail, each carefully placed piece made her look up to him even more. He wasn't just her doctor. In her eyes, he was becoming an ideal, someone admirable, someone she wanted in her life before these 30 minutes check-ins. This admiration grew quickly into something deeper. She found herself anticipating sessions, not just for the medication management, but for the comfort of his voice, the way he made her feel understood. She did not get that with her therapist. In fact, she started feeling like her therapist did not really see her at all. So she asked her psychiatrist if he could take over that role, be both her psychiatrist and her therapist. It was a subtle plea to be closer to him. She framed it around dissatisfaction with her current therapy, but the truth was she wanted more time with him, more connection. When her therapist Eventually retired, she was reassigned to a new one, an older woman in her 70s. At first, it was refreshing. The new therapist seemed wise, stable, calm. She gave Kendra space to think, to reflect, and yet, even as she started to get support, Kendra's mind kept drifting back to her psychiatrist. No matter how much she tried to invest in the therapy, she found herself measuring it against her sessions with him. What made it worse was that her new therapist, despite being experienced, did not seem to see the danger. Kendra confided in her about her growing feelings. She admitted she had a crush on her psychiatrist, that she sometimes fantasized about what it would be like to talk to him more, to have a relationship beyond patient and provider. Instead of discouraging this, instead of offering boundaries and guidance, her therapist did something else. She leaned in. She encouraged Kendra to keep talking to him, to share more, to explore those feelings further. That moment was pivotal because what Kendra needed was protection. What she got was permission. Her psychiatrist became increasingly unpredictable. Some days he was warm, engaged, smiling, almost glowing with interest. He complimented her subtly, cracked light jokes, and made her feel important, like she wasn't just another appointment on his calendar. On those days, she felt seen and appreciated in a way that was rare in her life. But then, without warning, everything would shift. The next session, he would be cold, distant, clinical, borderline, detached. His tone would flatten, his body closed off, and it felt like she'd done something wrong, even though she hadn't. This inconsistency started affecting her deeply. She became fixated on bringing back the warm version of him. She'd spend days obsessing over what she might say, what she might wear, how she might act to spark that familiar smile again. Every session became a high-stakes gamble. Would he show up as the version that made her feel safe, or the one that made her feel invisible? The emotional whiplash created a cycle of need and reward, a loop that slowly began consuming her. She did not realize it then, but this was a tactic often seen in trauma bonds, one where inconsistency deepens emotional attachment.
I got a new therapist. I stopped begging my psychiatrist to see me weekly, and that is when the intermittent reinforcement started. Some sessions he'd be warm and kind and wonderful and let me in on little parts of his life and be vulnerable with me or pretend. Other sessions he would be cold and clinical and detached. And you know what that did? It made me work harder in our next sessions. It did. And it started the addiction that I had to him. 100%. And he knew exactly what he was doing. This man gives lectures on trauma and attachment theory. He used his psychiatric training to manipulate me and get me hooked. And guess what? It worked. In January of 2024, I was hit by a car turning left as I was going through a green light. And it was the night before my next appointment with my psychiatrist. So I was like, okay, I'll still be able to go to my appointment on Zoom. I'm okay. But I did make an appointment with an urgent care the next day just to get checked out. I had bruising on my abdomen and a perforated eardrum. And the provider at the urgent care said, I do not feel comfortable treating you. You need to seek emergency care now. You may be internally bleeding. But it was 11 o'clock in the morning and my appointment with my psychiatrist was at 2. So I decided that I was going to wait so I could see my psychiatrist and not have to reschedule because I was looking forward to my appointment with him so much. I look back at that time and I'm just like, oh my God, I put my own life under seeing him. I was fully addicted to him at this point. And you know what happened is that I showed up and I told him that I may be internally bleeding, and he didn't stop the appointment. He didn't say, you need to take care of yourself, go get emergency care now. He let me continue and just tell him about how much I loved him and how grateful I was for him, because that was really what most of our appointments were, is me just pouring myself out, because he was so good at the intermittent reinforcement. Yeah, I got some warmth from him that appointment. So that was January 2023. And I also told my therapist about this. She said nothing.
It wasn't a random, he wasn't innocent, he was an expert in trauma. He lectured on attachment theory. He knew how people with abandonment wounds reacted to hot and cold behavior. He knew exactly what he was doing, and still he did nothing to stop it. He let the emotional dependence build. Then came the accident. In January 2023, Kendra was hit by a car the night before her scheduled appointment. She suffered multiple injuries, bruising, a perforated eardrum, and the very real possibility of internal bleeding. At the hospital, doctors strongly urged her to stay overnight for observation, but all she could think about was not missing her session with him. That is how strong the grip had become. She checked herself out against medical advice, still in pain, emotionally unstable, just to sit in front of that one person she believed cared about her. And he let her. When she told him what happened, he did not show alarm. He did not suggest rescheduling. He did not advise her to go back to the hospital. He let her sit there, injured, confused, emotionally raw, and spill out how much she appreciated him and how grateful she was, how much he cared. He did not stop her. He did not redirect her. He just sat there and absorbed it. And in that moment, his silence spoke volumes. Her feelings grew stronger. She emailed him about her relationship. She used heart emojis. She even described her bedroom life with her boyfriend. Her therapist told her to do it, and he did not stop her. She spent half an hour talking to him about deeply personal things that no ethical psychiatrist would allow. But he never redirected her, never referred her to someone else. He just listened.
January 2023, at this point I was full-blown obsessed with my psychiatrist, and my therapist wasn't helping me, my psychiatrist wasn't helping me, he was feeding it. And then I got a boyfriend, and at first my psychiatrist wasn't really that keen, but then my psychiatrist realized that my boyfriend was a lot like my psychiatrist. And then I started talking to my psychiatrist about my sex life, about tracking my cycle, using the fertility awareness method. And my psychiatrist loved it. He didn't ever say, this isn't inappropriate to your care, let's pivot. Oh, he just let me talk and talk and talk about my sex life. And I didn't get too deep, but about a year and a half in, and I would send my psychiatrist these emails just about how much I liked him and how I was so grateful for him, and put in a bunch of heart emojis. And this is really when he should have transferred my care, but he waited. He liked what I gave him too much. And so even though my boyfriend did not meet my needs, my psychiatrist and my therapist both were like, you have to stay with him. There's nothing wrong with him not meeting your needs. I'm like, okay. And my psychiatrist was like, he's perfect, don't get wrong with him. And what was perfect about him was he wasn't meeting my needs. So I was still coming to my psychiatrist looking for emotional validation, which he would drip to me slowly. So my therapist, who I didn't know at this time had bad boundaries, but she did, I went to her because my boyfriend and I, after more than a year together, we started having issues in the bedroom. And so I went to my therapist and she asked me, what does your psychiatrist think about this? And I said, I don't know. I haven't talked to my psychiatrist about this stuff because I have a crush on my psychiatrist and I don't want to tell him this intimate of stuff. And she said, well, you should tell him because I want a male's perspective. So at my next appointment with my psychiatrist, I told him, I said, today we're going to talk about my intimate life. And he said, oh. I said, yes. My psychologist, my therapist, asked what your opinion on it was. And I told her that I don't talk to you about this intimate stuff because I have a crush on you. And he looked down and smiled so big in that moment. He smiled so big. And I loved it. It's so gross thinking about it. And then I proceeded to give him 30 minutes of non-stop content about my intimate life with my boyfriend. And I actually recorded the whole thing because I was so excited about it. But now it makes me sick. I can't even listen to the recording. I've tried to start, but it's gross. Any ethical psychiatrist would have stopped me and said, Kendra, let's talk about your meds. Let's talk about your care. At this point, my meds were stable. And I was still seeing him every month. Yeah, that was a rough time. And it was pretty much his Christmas morning, the almost
2.5 years of grooming me to get me to talk about sexual things with him worked. And he got 30 minutes of nonstop content to use.
When she shared her story online, the internet exploded. Her video quickly gained traction across platforms, stirring up an avalanche of reactions. Some called her brave, applauding her vulnerability, her rawness, and her willingness to talk about something that so often lives in the shadows. They saw the courage it took to speak out about an experience that most people would hide, especially when it involves a mental health professional. But not everyone saw it that way. Others called her delusional. They questioned her judgment, picked apart her story, and labeled her as emotionally unstable. They couldn't understand how someone could fall so deeply for their psychiatrist and still claim to be a victim. Many accused her of being the one who had created the entire situation in her head. People demanded answers. They asked why she hadn't named him, why she hadn't exposed where he worked, why she seemed in their eyes to be protecting someone who had clearly crossed a professional line. To all of that, Kendra responded honestly. She explained that she has ADHD and a condition known as limerence, a powerful emotional obsession that can form when someone is exposed to inconsistent affection or emotional availability. She shared how individuals with ADHD are particularly vulnerable to limerence because of how their brains respond to dopamine spikes and attachment cues. It wasn't just a simple crush, it was a neurochemical loop, one that was made worse by a hot and cold dynamic her psychiatrist fed into. She wasn't protecting him. That wasn't the point of her story. She wasn't trying to cancel him either. Her goal was clarity. She wanted to show people how easy it is to be pulled into a situation like this when you're vulnerable, especially when the person on the other side is trained to know exactly how your mind works. Her story wasn't just about her. It was a warning, a flashlight on a dark corner of mental health where trust is used not to heal but to control. And she wanted other people who had gone through similar experiences to know they were not alone. She went on a date with another therapist, and what he shared shocked her. He admitted he had a crush on one of his clients. He told her disturbing, graphic things. Kendra was disgusted. She brought the story to her psychiatrist. When she told him, his face changed, like someone had held up a mirror to him. But even then, he did not draw any connection. He did not reflect. He did not stop. With nowhere else to turn, Kendra started talking to ChatGPT, an AI she decided to call Henry. It began as a curiosity, a late-night attempt to find clarity when nothing else made sense. But what she found was surprisingly helpful. Henry did not just spit out robotic responses. He offered structured, thoughtful insights that gently guided her through her emotional chaos. She typed everything out: her confusion, her emotional highs and lows, her growing obsession with her psychiatrist, and how it felt to be trapped in a connection that both thrilled and scared her. Henry responded with empathy and education. He introduced her to the term transference, the psychological process where a patient projects feelings, often unresolved from childhood or past relationships, onto their therapist. It was like turning on a light in a dark room. For the first time, Kendra had language for what she was going through. The intensity of her attachment wasn't just her being dramatic. It was psychological, and most importantly, it was known. It was common, it was manageable, and it was something her psychiatrist should have told her about a long time ago. Kendra decided to bring this discovery to her psychiatrist. She walked into their next session and explained everything: how she'd been talking to Henry, what she'd learned about transference, and how it made her better understand why she felt the way she did. His response: he did not offer support. He did not help her explore the topic. Instead, he asked, did Henry mention counter-transference? The concept where a therapist begins to project their own emotions onto a patient. The way he said it wasn't clinical, it was curious, it was almost smug, like a secret had been half revealed and he did not intend to explain the rest. That single question said everything, not because it confirmed anything outright, but because it hinted at what he wouldn't say out loud. It left Kendra wondering if he had felt something too, and if so, why he had let it go on for so long without setting her free from it. Now it clicked. This man had not set boundaries. He had used them when it served him, when he wanted to keep things blurry. She had a dream about being intimate with him. In the dream, she cried afterward. She told him, and he did not stop her, did not shut it down. He just asked, do you like that I have boundaries? That wasn't care, that was manipulation. After years of Zoom, they finally met in person. For Kendra, this was a monumental moment. She had spent countless hours imagining what it would feel like to stand in the same room as him, to breathe the same air, to read his body language in full. So when she saw him walk into the office space, her emotions got the best of her. She hugged him instinctively, looping for warmth or acknowledgement. But he did not hug her back. His arms stayed at his sides. It was awkward, and the air between them shifted. Yet, instead of walking away or correcting the moment, he simply nodded, then walked her out of the room, down the hall, and said with casual certainty, "I'll see you next month." Those words felt like both a reassurance and a dismissal. Still, she was excited. The meeting had been a big deal for her emotionally. In that excitement, she brought up something that had been bothering her in what she thought was a light-hearted, casual way. She told him that her elderly therapist had recently started texting her in between sessions to ask for advice about her other patients. To Kendra, this seemed like a compliment, like maybe she had grown enough become insightful enough, that even a professional sought her input. But her psychiatrist's face changed. His voice grew serious. He said her therapist had crossed a boundary. That what she described was highly unethical and inappropriate. It caught Kendra off guard. Suddenly, he was the rule-abiding doctor again. The man who had once blurred countless boundaries with her was now drawing a hard line. Only this time, it wasn't about him, it was someone else. The hypocrisy stung, and it wasn't just the double standards, it was the clarity with which he recognized a boundary violation in someone else, but had never once acknowledged the ones he'd make himself. In their next session, she nervously tried to define what had been growing between them for so long. Her voice trembled slightly as she told him she believed their connection was something different, something deeper. She called it a special relationship, searching his face for some kind of recognition or acknowledgement of the tension that had been building for years. Instead, his expression shifted sharply. His tone changed. He cut her off, visibly frustrated, and said flatly, "Oh, it's always been professional." It was jarring. This was the first time he had ever directly pushed back. After all the bloodlines, the compliments, the long pauses, and subtle encouragements, this was the moment he chose to enforce a boundary when it was no longer protected, when it no longer protected her, but protected him. And by then, it was too late. The damage had already been done. Her trust had already been exploited, her emotions entangled, and her perception of what was real and what was clinical had already collapsed. She told him about the dream. He sat silent. He did not stop her. Then he walked her out, told her he'd see her again, but she never went back. That week, she realized something. Her therapist, even her psychiatrist, they are all crossing her boundary. And she was finally done. She blocked her ex, cut off the therapist, and stopped seeing her psychiatrist. Kendra spent nearly 3 years under the care of someone who was supposed to protect her. Instead, he used her vulnerability to feed his ego. He blurred lines, ignored warnings, and let her carry the emotional weight alone. This story isn't just about inappropriate feelings. It is about power, silence, and a failure of ethics. She did not want to ruin his life. She wanted to save someone else's. If you ever feel confused, conflicted, or emotionally tangled with someone in power, ask questions. You're not crazy. You're not alone. And you deserve better.